Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are really strapping in for a big one.
Definitely.
We're tackling what might be the most chronologically complex subject in all of our source material.
Yeah, I think you're right about that.
The prophetic sequence, dealing with that final 7-year period. People usually call it the last week.
Of last week.
Hmm.
It's dense, it's incredibly specific, and honestly, it's deeply debated territory.
For sure.
We're going to be leaning heavily on, Daniel, Revelation, and also the Olivet Discourse in Matthew.
D-texts.
And our mission today, let's be clear, it's singular. We're not here to debate theology, really, or different interpretations.
Right.
We are just trying to map the events of this last week into a clear chronological timeline.
The sequence.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Defined entirely by these specific day counts we find in the text.
Okay, so taking a deep dive into the blueprint, as it were. And to do that, we have to start with the math, the prophetic math.
Yep, the clock.
The whole framework hangs on Daniel's prophecy, this covenant lasting 1 week of years, 7 years. So what are the ground rules for this prophetic clock?
Well, ground rules within the source material anyway, they're pretty much non-negotiable. Prophecy uses this specific way of counting.
Okay.
A prophetic year is always 360 days, not 365.
Ah, right. That's crucial.
It is. So that makes a 7-year period exactly 2,520 days total.
Okay.
And crucially, half of that week works out to precisely 12,260 days.
12,260. I feel like I've seen that number everywhere in these texts.
You have. Because that number, 1,260, it's the absolute spinal column holding this entire chronology together. It's foundational.
It's the fixed point, the yardstick we measure everything else against. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, before we even get past day one, there's something we have to address, right?
Mm-hmm.
The single biggest interpretive sticking point, I guess, that affects how we see the start of the second half. It's that phrase in Daniel 9.27 about the midpoint.
Ah, yes, that phrase. It deals with when the sacrifices stop, and it has 2 major interpretations. We really need to define these up front so everyone's on the same page.
Okay, let's do it.
So the traditional reading, translation 1, holds that the Antichrist causes the sacrifice to cease for half of the week.
Meaning the stopping lasts for 12,260 days.
Exactly. It lasts for that duration. Translation 2, though, reads it as in the midst of the week.
Which sounds like it happens at the exact midpoint, day 1260.
Precisely. It implies the action, like maybe the abomination itself, happens at that midpoint, and then the effects of that action define the remaining 1,260 days.
That feels like a pretty massive difference. Does adopting translation 2 totally mess up the sequence of events we're about to lay out?
You'd think so, but what's fascinating, according to our source material, is that it actually doesn't change the order of the events themselves. Yeah. It really only shifts let's say, the calendar start date for when the judgments begin. The sequence, the beast's rule, the witnesses dying, the resurrection, the plagues. That internal logic stays the same. It just gets shifted forward if you use translation 2.
Okay, that's interesting. So for clarity, which translation are we primarily following for this specific timeline mapping?
For building this specific narrative timeline today, we're sticking with translation 1.
Okay.
The idea that the initial event we're discussing lasts for the 12,260 days. But it's important for you listening to understand, if you lean towards the in the midst view, the steps we outline still follow the same basic pattern.
Got it. So fixed 7-year frame, 360-day years, 12,260-day halves. We're working with an event-based structure. With that number framework solid, let's talk about the starting gun. What event is the absolute catalyst? What defines the beginning of the last week, the moment that 7-year clock actually starts ticking loudly?
Well, the clock technically starts ticking when that firm covenant with many is made, according to Daniel 9.27. That kicks off the 7 years.
Okay, the covenant first.
But the really visible signal, the event that shows the last week, is truly underway. That's the installation of the abomination of desolation.
Standing in the holy place.
Exactly. That's the ultimate catalyst. That's when things really visibly begin.
And our sources don't leave us guessing who or what this abomination is, do they?
Not at all. It's identified very clearly as the son of destruction.
Also called the lawless man.
Right. Or the Antichrist.
Yeah.
This lines up directly with what Paul writes in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2.
Okay.
The text paints him as this adversary figure who opposes and just exalts himself above everything that is called God or is worshipped.
So not just a powerful leader, but someone claiming divinity.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It specifically says he takes his seat in the physical temple building and actually proclaims himself to be God.
That detail about the physical temple seems incredibly important because, right now in 2024, there isn't one standing in Jerusalem.
That's the absolute linchpin, the essential requirement for this whole prophecy sequence to even begin. The Antichrist needs a holy place, a physical structure, to stand in and desecrate.
So preconditions need to be met.
Two major ones, according to the sources, that aren't met yet. First, the physical temple has to be rebuilt.
Right.
And second, the practice of animal sacrifices, those rituals, they need to be reestablished.
Which also aren't happening now.
Correct. The 7 years only truly commence. Once this figure, the son of destruction, has this framework in place, temple built, sacrifices happening, and then he desecrates it by sitting there and claiming he's God.
Wow. Okay. So once he commits this ultimate act of blasphemy in the physical temple, the moment he declares himself God, what's the immediate fallout? It can't exactly be a quiet affair.
Oh, it's instantaneous. It triggers immediate global chaos. The sources point to two direct, simultaneous consequences that really define the nature of those first 12,060 days.
Okay, what are they?
First, he immediately enforces mandatory beast worship on the entire world. No exceptions mentioned.
Mandatory worship.
And second, that exact moment is explicitly identified as the very beginning of the Great Tribulation.
So it's not a slow buildup.
No, the source is very clear on this. This isn't like escalating tensions boiling over. It's an instantaneous imposition of global crisis, total oppression, and a mandatory religious dictate. The second he sits down, the whole world is forced into a choice of allegiance.
Okay, let's dive into that first half then. Those first 12,260 days. This is the period where the beast seems to have pretty much unhindered authority.
That's right. It's often called the 42 months in Revelation, which again lines up perfectly with our 12,260 days.
Right.
And this is a specific time frame when the beast is granted power, both political and sort of spiritual, to make war with the saints.
And a key part of him establishing his own divine authority is stopping those sacrifices that had just been restarted in the new temple.
Yes, exactly. Daniel 9.27 again. It says that for half of the week, or 12,260 days, he causes the animal sacrifice and offering to cease.
Which is a huge statement.
It's profound. It's an act of self-deification. He sits in the temple, the place built for God's worship through sacrifice, and then he stops those rituals. He's essentially signaling, you don't need those intermediaries anymore because I am the new object of worship.
Okay, hold on. I need to pause on that distinction for a second. Why would the beast even bother stopping animal sacrifices? I mean, theologically, didn't Christ's death already make those old covenant rituals kind of obsolete?
That's a really sharp question.
Wouldn't stopping them almost seem like he's inadvertently promoting the new covenant idea?
It's a critical nuance the sources actually address. You have to distinguish between the, let's say, the shadow and the substance.
Okay.
What the beast abolishes are the temporary physical temple sacrifices. These are the rites of the old covenant, sort of a throwback really to that preparatory system.
Right, the rituals.
He cannot abolish the true sacrifice the eternal new covenant established through Christ's blood. That's beyond his reach.
He can't abolish the true sanctuary either.
Exactly. Which the New Testament identifies as the body of the believer, filled with the Holy Spirit. So his act is aimed squarely at controlling the physical, the public, the institutionalized religion here on earth.
Ah, I see.
He's demonstrating his supremacy over the rituals and structures of the former covenants that he can physically touch and stop. He's basically eliminating all visible rivals to his own divinity within that physical realm.
That clarifies his target much better. He's stamping out the physical institutional worship he can actually control. While the true sanctuary, the believer, remains spiritually untouchable, but physically incredibly vulnerable.
Precisely. And that physical vulnerability is exploited ruthlessly during these 42 months, these 12,260 days.
How so?
Revelation 13 spells it out pretty graphically. The beast rules with blasphemous language, constantly claiming he's divine, and he's given authority over every tribe, nation, language, and people for that specific duration.
Global authority.
Total. And the core mechanism for maintaining this control is the mandatory enforcement of beast worship.
Yeah.
If you refuse, the threat is death.
And this naturally leads us to probably the most recognizable and frankly terrifying symbol of this whole period. The 666 mark.
Yeah, the mark of the beast.
How did the sources define this mark? And why is refusing it basically an automatic death sentence?
Fundamentally, the mark is presented as an instrument of both economic control and, crucially, theological allegiance.
It's tied into the economy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's enforced concurrently with those 12,260 days of the beast's absolute rule. The sources stress this isn't just like a bureaucratic ID number or something.
It's more profound.
It's a profound choice. Those who refuse it, the saints, they're killed. Why? Because without the mark, the text says you cannot buy or sell.
So you're cut off from society completely.
Completely cut off, can't participate, which means you're instantly flagged as an enemy of the state, an enemy of the beast's system.
But I want to push on this a bit. How does the source material really differentiate the 6666 mark from, say, just any other really strict economic regulation or ID system?
Yeah.
What makes taking it an irrevocable theological act, not just a survival tactic?
That's the core question. The sources are absolutely adamant. Taking the mark isn't just about getting global citizenship credentials or being able to buy groceries. It is framed as an explicit act of worship.
Worship of the beast.
Yes, and it's a choice driven fundamentally by the fear of death. If you prioritize your physical survival, your economic comfort, avoiding execution, if you put those things above absolute allegiance to God's commandments, the sources say you will take the mark. They actually draw a direct parallel to Adam eating the forbidden fruit in the garden.
Oh, so?
Adam's sin wasn't just, eating a piece of fruit. It was valuing his own perceived interest, or maybe the serpent's lie, above God's direct command.
A choice of allegiance.
Exactly. The mark operates on the same mechanism. It's a choice rooted in prioritizing life, meaning physical existence, and comfort over law, meaning divine allegiance and God's commands. It is presented as the absolute final loyalty test.
So the mark becomes the tangible symbol, the physical manifestation of the beast's ultimate goal, which we'll get into later maybe, about changing God's law itself.
That's it.
If you take the mark, you're essentially setting your allegiance to the beast's system of law, which inherently contradicts God's law.
Precisely. And we'll definitely connect this back to Daniel 7.25 about changing times and laws.
Yeah.
The beast's law becomes supreme on earth during this period, and the mark is effectively the oath of allegiance to that law.
So refusing it means choosing martyrdom.
It does, which paradoxically the sources define as choosing true life, eternal life, over temporary physical preservation.
Okay. Given this picture of total global enforcement, mandatory worship, the death penalty for refusal, the situation seems utterly hopeless for anyone trying to remain faithful.
It looks that way on the surface.
Yet our sources introduce two incredibly powerful figures who operate for this exact same duration of 12,260 days. The two witnesses.
Yes, the witnesses.
They must be the divine counterbalance to this global beast government, right?
They absolutely are. They represent the authorized divine resistance on earth during that time, and their role is just enormous.
What is their mission?
They're granted specific authority to prophesy for the entire 12,260 days. And they do this operating right in Jerusalem, the very city, the text says, where their Lord was crucified.
Wow.
Their mission seems twofold. First, active vocal warning against beast worship and taking the 666 mark.
A warning.
And second, preaching the eternal gospel to the entire world during this time of deception.
And who are they identified as?
Often, in this source material, they're closely identified with, or perhaps leading, the 144,000.
The sealed ones.
Yes, the last first fruits who are sealed and divinely protected during this period. The witnesses seem to be their primary spokespersons and protectors.
And their authority isn't just spiritual, is it? The descriptions sound almost, well, military. They seem to have power to physically resist the beast's global government.
Their power is described as unlike anything else on earth at that time.
Yeah.
Revelation 11 gives us the details. They can literally breathe fire from their mouths to destroy anyone who tries to harm them.
Fire from their mouths.
That's what it says. They also have authority to stop the rain from falling during the days of their prophecy.
Like Elijah.
Exactly. And turn water into blood and strike the earth with any plague as often as they want.
So they can inflict plagues too.
Yes. The source material uses a strong term suggesting they have the power to literally crush or defeat. That was the contextual idea. The beast's forces that come against them.
That makes them the only truly effective physical counterforce to the Son of Destruction's military might for that entire 3.5 years.
It appears so.
Their existence proves that even while the saints are being persecuted worldwide, they aren't completely abandoned or defenseless.
Absolutely. Their ministry seems to ensure that the persecution, while severe, happens within a controlled environment, divinely monitored, and to some extent limited. They stand as this constant, visible warning to the beast worshippers and simultaneously a beacon of hope and a source of protection for the saints who haven't taken the mark.
So the whole first 12,260 days is this incredibly dramatic, grinding trial. It's defined by this clash between the mandatory global mark system on one side.
And the miraculous, divinely empowered, maybe more localized power of these two prophets on the other.
Okay. Now, this is where, for me, it gets really interesting because the timeline, which has been so consistently locked at 12,260 days, suddenly fractures. It gets complicated by the introduction of two new numbers, 12,290 days and 1,335 days. What specific prophetic event happens right at that 12,260-day mark that ends this first phase and kicks off these new time counts?
Right at the 12 and 260-day mark, that's the finish line for the two witnesses' testimony. Revelation 11 says, when they have finished their testimony,
The mission is complete.
their mission is complete. At that point, the beast, specifically described as the one ascending from the abyss, is finally given temporary permission, temporary power to overcome them.
So he couldn't touch them before then.
Apparently not. But now he engages them in war, he overcomes them, and he kills them. This moment is portrayed as the absolute peak of triumph for the Antichrist system.
And their death isn't hidden, is it? It's meant to be seen.
Oh, it's designed as a global spectacle of victory for the beast. Their bodies are left lying in the street of the great city, Jerusalem again, for 3.5 days.
3.5 days.
And the whole world reportedly rejoices over their deaths. People send gifts to each other, celebrating as if they've finally been freed from these two prophets who tormented them.
But that's not the end of their story.
Not at all. After those specific 3.5 days, just that tiny sliver of time, the divine intervention flips the script completely.
What happens?
They are resurrected, life enters them, they stand up, and then they ascend to heaven in a cloud, in full view of their enemies who are terrified.
Wow. So their ascension marks the definitive end of that initial 12,260-day period of their prophecy.
Yes.
And it starts a new countdown period, right? This
Right.
is where Daniel 12 comes in, introducing those two extra durations. 12,090 days and 1,335 days. Both counted from the same starting point, the time the daily sacrifice was abolished and the abomination set up.
Correct.
So why the extra days? What's happening between day 1260 and these new numbers?
This is absolutely critical for understanding, according to the sources, God's timing and mercy towards the elect, the faithful. We have the 1,260 days of the witness's ministry and the beast's main authorized reign.
Right.
The 1,290 days mark is exactly 30 days after that initial 1,260.
Okay, 30 extra days.
And the 1,335 days mark is 75 days after the 1,260 midpoint. So 1,260 plus 75 equals 1,335.
75 days. Why that specific gap? What's happening in those 75 days between the witnesses ascending around day 1253.5 after the 3.5 days and this final 1,335-day mark?
The sources seem to suggest this 75-day window covers the immediate aftermath of witnesses' resurrection and ascension. Global shock, the reaction from the beast's followers, maybe a final period of gathering or sealing for the remaining saints.
A transition period.
Transition, exactly. But the absolute key is the endpoint of that period. Daniel 12, verse 12, explicitly states, "Blessed is the one who waits for and reaches the 3,335 days."
Blessed. What is the blessed?
Our source material interprets this 1,335-day mark as the definitive moment, the precise time of the first resurrection.
The resurrection of the righteous dead.
Yes, and also the lifting up, the catching away of the living saints who have endured until that point.
So the event commonly called the rapture.
That's how it's interpreted here, yes.
Yeah.
It's the culmination of their endurance through the tribulation. It's the promised blessing for reaching that 1,335-day finish line.
Okay, so the saints, the faithful believers, they endure the full force of the Great Tribulation, the persecution, the threat of the mark, the beast's reign for exactly 1,335 days. Then they receive this blessing, this escape.
That's the timeline presented. It's a fixed duration of suffering and testing, not an indefinite one.
A maximal time.
Yes. The maximal time of trial for the elect is set at 1,335 days. The 12,260 days define the beast's formal authority to rule and persecute. The 1,335 days seem to define the saints' required period of endurance.
And that 75-day difference?
That seems to be the margin, maybe the transition time between the end of the witness's public ministry and the final reward for the faithful.
This really connects to a major point that, honestly, often confuses people, the idea of the shortening of days.
Ah, Matthew 24.
Right. Christ says in Matthew 24 that the Great Tribulation will be so severe that if those days weren't shortened, basically no flesh would survive. How does this specific 1,335-day endpoint actually count as a shortening? It still sounds like a long time.
This is maybe the core interpretive insight from the source material on this passage. The days are shortened not because God magically speeds up time or cuts the 7 years short arbitrarily,
Okay.
but because he physically removes the elect from the earth before the absolute most severe phase of judgment within those 7 years begins.
Wait, so you're saying the Great Tribulation itself actually has two distinct phases of lethality, and the saints only experience the first phase?
That is exactly how the source material frames it. Phase 1 is the 1,335 days of intense persecution under the beast's wrath. It's human-on-human persecution driven by the Antichrist system.
Okay, and phase 2?
Phase 2 begins immediately after the 1,335 days after the saints are removed. This phase is far more severe and consists of direct divine judgment, the pouring out of the 7 plagues or 7 bowls of God's wrath.
Ah, the plagues from Revelation?
Exactly. And these plagues specifically target the non-elect, the beast worshippers who remain on earth. By being resurrected and raptured at the 335-day mark, the elect are completely removed from the earth and are therefore spared experiencing phase 2.
That's the shortening.
That is the mechanism of the shortening of days. God ensures his people are protected for the period of his own ultimate direct wrath. The persecution days under the beast have a fixed end for 335 days, but the subsequent judgment days, the plagues, are what the saints escape entirely.
That distinction is absolutely crucial. Okay. First half, beast's wrath primarily targeting the saints. Second half after day 1335, God's wrath targeting the beast's followers.
Let's transition fully now into that second, terrifying half of the week, the era of divine judgment.
Right. The shift is portrayed as immediate and incredibly dramatic. The very moment the first resurrection and the lifting up of the saints happen at that 3,335-day mark, the earth enters the period of the 7 plagues.
Which are described as?
They're defined explicitly as God's pure wrath, unmixed with mercy. This is judgment time.
And the saints, where are they during this?
Having been caught up into the air, as the texts often phrase it, they are essentially spectators. They are safe, removed from the direct impact zone. The 7 plagues are poured out specifically onto the earth and its remaining inhabitants, targeting precisely those who took the 666 mark and worshipped the beast's image.
So it's a moment of complete reversal, total reversal. Those who are doing the persecuting now face this unmitigated divine judgment, the very judgment they presumably mocked or blasphemously refused to fear.
Just how severe are these plagues described? You mentioned they are worse than the first 1,335 days. Our sources seem to suggest near total devastation.
They are depicted as absolutely cataclysmic. Revelation gives the grim details. Things like grievous sores breaking out on the beast worshippers, the entire sea turning to blood, all fresh water turning to blood, the sun scorching people with intense heat and terrifying global darkness.
It sounds like environmental collapse on a global scale.
Pretty much. The sources summarize it by saying the plagues caused the earth to be almost devastated. This isn't corrective punishment. It seems like total determined destruction aimed at the unrepentant system and its followers.
And do people repent under this pressure?
That's one of those horrifying details in Revelation. It says that even while suffering under these horrific plagues, the victims continue to gnaw their tongues in agony and blaspheme God. They don't repent.
Oh, wow.
It seems to just harden their hearts further, confirming their ultimate allegiance to the beast system right to the bitter end.
Okay, so in the midst of this global environmental and human catastrophe, the earthly power structure itself starts to turn on itself, leading to the very dramatic disruption of Babylon.
Yes, Revelation 17 and 18.
This is always a complex identification in prophecy. Who is the harlot of Babylon in this specific context, according to our source material? And why does the beast power eventually turn on her?
Okay, this requires looking closely at Revelation 17. Within this specific source material we're analyzing, the harlot of Babylon is consistently identified as the Babylon papacy. Representing not just a single church, but a vast, influential, worldwide religious and economic system that wields immense power and influence during the first part of the tribulation.
And she's depicted riding something.
Yes, she's shown riding and essentially controlling the red beast. This red beast symbolizes the powerful world beast government, the political and military apparatus, identified elsewhere as the seventh king or final empire.
So let me get this straight. The harlot, the religious ideological power, initially directs or manipulates the beast, the political military power, to enforce things like beast worship and the 666 mark during those first 1,335 days.
That's precisely the relationship depicted. The harlot is in the driver's seat initially. The 7 plagues begin while this coalition is still functioning. The harlot is still riding the beast.
But then something changes.
Yes. As the plagues rain down and devastate the earth, the relationship completely fractures. The sources point to this moment of bitter realization on the part of the political power structure.
What do they realize?
The red beast and its constituent powers, the 10 horns, come to hate the harlot. They seem to recognize that she, this religious system, is the root cause of the devastating divine judgment falling upon them. They realize they were deceived or manipulated by her.
So they blame her for the plagues.
It appears so. And they react violently. They turn against her, make her desolate and naked, eat her flesh, and burn her completely with fire. It's a total, brutal eradication.
That's a profound betrayal, a massive geopolitical and, I guess, theological shift right there at the end. The political power suffering under God's wrath brought on by the religious power's influence just purges itself of that influence.
Exactly. So once the harlot, this huge, controlling religious institution, is destroyed, what's left? The red beast is now acting alone. It becomes the purely self-governing, highly centralized, global power structure of the very, very end.
Still resisting God, though.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It shed its dominant, manipulative religious partner. And this now self-governing red beast then gears up for its final, fatal act of defiance.
Which is the ultimate showdown, the gathering at Armageddon.
Yes. The red beast, now in sole control of whatever global governments and armies survive the 7 plagues, gathers all its remaining forces together. It's a unified final effort against the returning Messiah. This gathering is famously known as Armageddon.
This isn't a battle between nations anymore.
No, it seems to be the nations united against God. It's the final human military mobilization against the divine.
And this is the point of Christ's final physical return to earth, which is different from the sort of unseen rapture at 1,335 days.
Absolutely distinct. This return is described as visible, dramatic, and utterly decisive. Jesus returns directly to the earth, accompanied by the heavenly armies, which include both angels and the glorified saints who were previously caught up.
And his return isn't peaceful this time.
No, it's one of immediate judgment. He confronts the assembled armies of the beast, and the 2 main figures headlining the tribulation, the red beast, the final world ruler, and the false prophet, the religious enforcer, maybe associated with the harlot system earlier, are immediately seized.
And what happens to them?
They are cast alive directly into the lake of fire. Instant, permanent judgment.
Okay. With the earthly human leaders dealt with, there's one final major adversary left, the ultimate source behind it all.
Satan himself. Yes. He's dealt with immediately after the beast and false prophet. An angel binds him with a great chain and casts him into the abyss, the bottomless pit.
For how long?
For 1,000 years. The text says this is specifically to prevent him from deceiving the nations during the millennial period that is set to follow these events.
Right, the millennium. Okay. And once that final judgment on the leaders and the binding of Satan is complete, this whole incredible, intense prophetic sequence concludes with what? The establishment of the new era?
Exactly. The focus shifts completely from judgment to restoration and eternal order.
Yeah.
The sources speak of the creation of a new heavens and a new earth.
A complete renewal.
Total renewal. And then the New Jerusalem, which is identified symbolically as the bride of Christ, descends from heaven to the new earth.
Signifying
The permanent dwelling of God with redeemed humanity, the fulfillment of the promised wedding feast of the Lamb, and the beginning of the eternal state. It's the ultimate resolution.
Wow. That provides an incredibly clear, albeit quite brutal, chronological map of these final 7 years, especially the judgment phase. Now that we understand the sequence of global events, we absolutely have to pivot back to the practical side, survival. If you, the listener, find yourself alive at the start of this last week, when that abomination appears, what are the specific, urgent, practical instructions the source material gives for navigating those initial, dangerous 1,335 days of mandatory persecution?
The primary instruction, the most urgent one, triggered the moment the abomination is visibly seen standing in the holy place, is crystal clear. Flee to the mountains.
Matthew 24 again?
Matthew 24.16. And it's presented as absolutely uncompromising. When you see the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains.
And the text emphasizes the sheer speed and necessity of this flight, doesn't it? Even over basic material needs.
The urgency is paramount. It
Yeah.
cannot be overstated. The warnings are incredibly explicit. If you happen to be on the housetop, don't even go down to get anything out of your house.
Wow.
If you're out working in the field, don't turn back to grab your cloak. This is portrayed as a flight for your very life, where any concern for material security has to be totally sacrificed for speed and immediate separation.
You have to prioritize getting away instantly from that center of desecration, presumably Jerusalem or wherever the temple is.
That seems to be the immediate context, yes.
Yeah.
Separate from the city being judged.
But let me challenge the purely literal interpretation here for a moment. We just established the Son of Destruction has global authority for those 42 months, potentially longer.
Right.
How does fleeing from Jerusalem to, the nearby Judean hills offer any real protection from a globalized power structure that's enforcing a universal mark with the death penalty? It doesn't seem geographically sufficient.
And you've hit on the absolutely crucial allegorical or symbolic layer of interpretation here. The source material consistently interprets the mountains, or sometimes the wilderness, not just as physical high ground,
Okay.
but as a divinely designated, prepared place of protection. It's defined more by God's intervention and preservation than by mere geographical remoteness or elevation.
So the flight isn't just away from danger, it's towards a specific spiritual sanctuary.
It seems to be both physical and spiritual, yes.
Yeah.
Revelation 12 gives us the parallel narrative that clarifies this. It describes the woman, often interpreted as the faithful church or remnant Israel, being given 2 wings of a great eagle so she can fly into the wilderness.
Where?
To her place, a specific location prepared by God. The Greek is topos, suggesting a definite place. The source uses yebichio. And there, in that prepared place, she is nourished and kept safe from the serpent, Satan, for 12,260 days, that same key duration.
So fleeing to the mountains means actively seeking refuge in this divinely protected sanctuary, which is miraculously maintained by God's power throughout that first half of the week.
That appears to be the core meaning. It's finding the place God has set aside for preservation.
Okay, but then who is providing the actual boundary, the physical defense for this prepared place for those 1,260 days? How is the beast kept out?
This ties back to our earlier discussion. The primary protectors and defenders associated with this prepared place are the 2 witnesses and potentially the 144,000 they lead.
Ah, the ones with the supernatural power.
Exactly.
Right.
The witnesses, with their described power to destroy the beast's forces that try to harm them, they seem to serve as the living, physical manifestation of the boundary wall that the beast cannot cross until their testimony is finished at the 12,260-day mark.
So fleeing to the mountain or wilderness effectively means finding and joining the community under the direct supernatural protection of these figures.
That seems to be the implication. Seeking refuge within that God-protected zone ensures physical protection from the beast's enforcement armies and, crucially, from the forced implementation of the mark.
That makes a lot more sense, connecting the flight instruction directly to the witness's protective role during the same time frame. It resonates with that urgency we talked about. It's like a mandatory separation, almost like Lot escaping Sodom before the fire fell.
That's a very strong parallel the source material itself draws. Lot needed to escape Sodom, guided and protected by the 2 angels, who could be seen as a type of the 2 witnesses. And he was specifically commanded to flee to the mountain to avoid the coming judgment, the sulfur and fire, which itself could symbolize the 7 plagues that follow the saints' escape.
So the theological principle is consistent.
It seems to be.
Yeah.
Mandatory, decisive separation from the wicked system, whether called Babylon or Sodom, before the final divine judgment falls. Why? So that the faithful do not share in her sins, as Revelation warns, and therefore do not receive any of her plagues.
Separate before judgment.
Okay.
Beyond just the escape route itself, the text gives some serious warnings about things that could hinder this flight. Specifically, that rather stark woe pronounced upon women who are pregnant or nursing babies at that time.
Yes, Matthew 24.19.
This needs very careful explanation, obviously, to avoid sounding literalistic or judgmental towards mothers. How do the sources interpret this?
Almost universally, this warning is interpreted allegorically. It's about spiritual preparedness and missional efficiency, not a judgment on motherhood itself.
Okay, explain that.
Those who are symbolically pregnant or nursing are seen as believers who are still burdened by significant worldly attachments, responsibilities, or perhaps are spiritually immature.
Like needing milk.
Exactly. Still feeding on the milk of basic doctrine, not yet ready for the solid food required for the incredibly demanding mission and hardship ahead. They lack the spiritual mobility, the focus, the unencumbered dedication needed for that instantaneous life-or-death flight and the subsequent endurance in the wilderness.
So the woe is really a warning that those who are still too carnal, too attached to the comforts and securities of this world, will face extreme unnecessary hardship and potentially fail when that moment of flight arrives because they can't detach quickly enough.
That is precisely the point being made. Their emotional ties, their physical encumbrances, their lack of spiritual readiness, these things impede their ability to respond instantly and effectively to the divine warning signal, the abomination.
And this seems to tie directly into the very next warning given. Pray that your flight may not be in winter or on the Sabbath.
Yes, Matthew 24.2i. Again, highly symbolic.
So what are the allegorical meanings here? What do winter and Sabbath represent in this context of urgent escape?
Winter generally signifies external hardship, difficult conditions, environmental factors that would naturally slow down an escape. Symbolically, it could represent a time of spiritual coldness, unpreparedness, or just facing overwhelming external obstacles during the flight.
Making the journey harder than it needs to be.
Right. And the Sabbath warning is also not seen as a criticism of honoring the Sabbath day itself. Rather, it speaks to a potential rigid adherence to rest or established routine when immediate, urgent work, the work of fleeing for survival and continuing the mission, is critically required.
So being bound by rule when action is needed.
Exactly. The underlying message of both warnings is that maximum effort, agility, and single-minded focus are absolutely required during this initial escape phase of the tribulation.
Right.
Any constraint, whether it's external, like bad weather, winter, or internal, like a restrictive mindset, legalism, Sabbath,
Right.
or just plain worldly attachments, like Lot's wife looking back. Any of these will introduce severe hardship and potential failure right at the most critical moment of transition.
It's a comprehensive call to be mentally, spiritually, and perhaps even physically unburdened and ready to act without hesitation the second that sign appears.
It really is the ultimate call for spiritual minimalism and absolute focus on the immediate task.
Okay. And finally, during this incredibly turbulent period, when the Antichrist himself is on the world stage claiming divinity, the sources give one more very firm warning. Don't be misled by false appearances of Christ himself.
Yes, this warning is presented as absolutely vital, especially because the world will be reeling. You'll have the shock of the abomination's claims, the chaos of the Great Tribulation starting. People will be desperate for hope, for rescue.
So they'll be vulnerable to deception.
Extremely vulnerable. So when people inevitably start making claims like, look, Christ is here, or, he's out there in the wilderness, or maybe he's secreted away in a private inner room somewhere.
Believers must do what?
The saints must categorically reject all such claims. Don't even go out to look.
And why such an absolute rejection of any report of a secret or localized return?
Because the sources are emphatic. The genuine return of Christ to earth, the second coming, will be neither subtle nor localized.
How will it be?
The source quotes Matthew 24.27 directly. Christ's arrival, his parousia, will be universally visible and instantly recognizable. For as the lightning comes from the east and flashes as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man.
Like lightning, visible everywhere at once.
Exactly. It will be an utterly undeniable global event witnessed simultaneously by every eye left on earth. The strong implication is that any claim of a hidden Messiah, a localized appearance, or a secret return before that universally visible event is, by definition, a deception.
Engineered by the enemy.
Presumably engineered by the enemy to lure the elect away from their mission, perhaps out of the safety of the prepared place, and ultimately back into the path of deception and judgment. The true return is the unmistakable end of the age. Anything else reported before that is presented as a dangerous fraud.
That provides really profound clarity on the practical logistics of endurance and avoiding deception during that first phase.
Okay, let's just quickly synthesize that foundational timeline one more time, just the key beats, and then let's address the core theological conflict that seems to dictate whether someone succeeds or fails during these trials.
Okay, the sequence, built on these key movements, looks like this. First, the Son of Destruction sits in the physical temple. That's the abomination. It initiates the last week and the Great Tribulation.
Start point.
Second, physical sacrifices cease. Global persecution and mandatory beast worship, including the 666 mark, are enforced for 12,260 days while the two witnesses prophesy and protect.
Phase 1.
Third, the saints endure all of this until the 3,335-day mark. At that precise point, the first resurrection of the dead in Christ and the rapture of the living faithful occur. This is the shortening of days for the elect, removing them from earth.
Escape point for the faithful. Fourth, immediately after that removal, the 7 plagues, God's direct wrath, are poured out upon the earth, specifically targeting the non-elect beast worshippers who remain.
Judgment phase begins.
Fifth, during or after the plagues, the red beast, the political power, turns on the harlot of Babylon, the religious power, and destroys her utterly.
Internal collapse.
Finally, the now self-governing red beast gathers its forces at Armageddon. Jesus returns physically to earth with the saints and angels, judges the wicked forces, casts the beast and false prophet into the lake of fire, blinds Satan in the abyss,
Climax.
and then initiates the new heavens and new earth, bringing down the new Jerusalem. End sequence.
It's an incredibly tight, event-driven sequence. Okay,
Yeah.
Now let's go back to something you mentioned earlier, connecting to the beast and the mark. You said his ultimate goal, beyond just political control, was related to Daniel 7.25 attempting to change times and laws.
Yes.
Why is that framed as the central conflict? What does that really mean?
This really elevates the conflict beyond just politics or survival. It puts it into the ultimate spiritual dimension. Daniel 7.25 describes this small horn, identified with the son of destruction, as one who intends to change times and laws.
Meaning
Meaning he is fundamentally attacking the divinely established order, the core ethical and relational framework God set up for humanity. The source material we're looking at interprets this primarily as an ultimate spiritual war over allegiance to God's fundamental commandments, maybe best summarized by the Ten Commandments.
Okay, so how does this intention to change times and laws actually manifest itself during the tribulation events we've discussed? Where do we see it in action?
It manifests most clearly and acutely through the mandatory compliance demanded by the 666 mark and the associated beast worship.
Ah, the mark again.
The mark becomes the primary instrument Satan uses via the beast to try and enforce the Antichrist's new law, his new system. It's a system that demands ultimate allegiance to him and effectively redefines morality based on his authority, not God's.
So the conflict boils down to whose law you obey.
Exactly. The entire conflict hinges on the faithful's unwavering willingness to adhere strictly to God's established law, even when the consequence for doing so is certain death.
Can you give me a concrete example of how that might play out?
Sure. Let's take the Sabbath commandment, which is explicitly about time and law. If the beast's global economic system demands work or specific economic activity 7 days a week for survival, may be tied directly to the mark,
Right.
and God's law explicitly commands rest and worship on a specific day, then accepting the mark or complying with the 7-day work mandate to survive inherently implies you are accepting the beast's system of times and laws as superior to or overriding God's system.
You're choosing the beast's authority over God's command in that specific instance.
Precisely. Or take the first commandment. You shall have no other gods before me. If the beast demands worship or even just symbolic allegiance via the mark which represents his authority, and you comply in order to save your physical life,
You've broken the first commandment.
you've essentially proclaimed the beast to be sovereign over God in that moment, thereby accepting his attempt to change the law. The choice presented starkly in these sources boils down to this fundamental question. Are you willing to violate God's clearly established divine law in order to guarantee your physical life and maybe some measure of comfort in the beast's system?
And if you choose life, physical life, above loyalty to God's law,
Then according to this interpretation, you fall under the beast's dominion, you've accepted his changed law, and crucially, you will not receive the blessing promised only to those who endure faithfully and reach that 1,335-day mark. You miss the escape.
that provides a really crucial framework for understanding the immense pressure of that 1,335-day endurance test. The whole prophetic sequence, in a way, seems designed specifically to force this ultimate binary choice of allegiance based on law.
It certainly seems that way. The knowledge of the timeline, the sequence of events, it's valuable, it's map. But the preparedness for that choice, understanding what's truly at stake when the pressure comes, that seems to be the most essential takeaway for anyone engaging with this material.
Which brings us perfectly to our final thought for you, the listener, to take away from this deep dive. The entire structure of the last week, as laid out in these incredibly detailed prophetic sources, functions as a kind of divine separation mechanism. That shortening of days for the elect isn't about God randomly changing the clock. It's presented as a fixed 1,335-day endurance test, followed by a guaranteed removal before the absolute worst judgments begin.
The plagues.
Right. So the real question these sources seem to pose isn't when exactly the last week starts calendrically, but rather when that abomination is finally seen standing where it shouldn't be, where would you run? Both
Yeah.
physically and spiritually. And perhaps even more pointedly, Are the current attachments in your life, those symbolic, pregnant, and nursing elements we discussed, are they compatible with the need for that kind of instantaneous flight and unwavering focus?
It's a challenging question.
Because the core conflict presented here isn't ultimately about surviving physical warfare or economic collapse, as terrifying as those are. It's about that silent, internal, terrifying choice each individual faces between allegiance to physical survival under the beast's law and unwavering devotion to the divine law, even if it means martyrdom. That choice determines everything.
Absolutely. The chronology gives us the map, the sequence. But understanding why the Antichrist seeks to change times and laws is what illuminates the profound spiritual significance of why something like the 666 mark isn't just portrayed as a regulatory hurdle, but as an act of ultimate spiritual betrayal. Preparedness for that choice is key.
A truly profound and definitely challenging deep dive into some extremely dense but fascinating source material. Thank you so much for walking us through this complex timeline today.
My pleasure. It's crucial stuff to map out.
And thank you all for joining us on the deep dive. We will catch you next time.